Our hope today is that you'll become inspired through this show, so that you can take the challenges that you have to face every single day and tackle it with a fresh new perspective. It's a fun way to get into the minds of people that you wouldn't usually hear from, but most importantly, it'll get you out of your comfort zone and encourage you to try new things. Now, don't miss me too much, but I'm going to leave you in the hands of a very, very important man. His name is Balaram. I forgot the script. Now join me and put your hands together as we welcome the host for the show, Balaram!
So everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Inspire Show. We're here at Bhakti Rasamrita with His Holiness Bhakti Rasamrita Swami.
Krishna.
Maharaj is a senior monk, travels around the world. He's a disciple of His Holiness Radhanath Swami. And he has a lot to share with us today. So my first question for you today, Maharaj, is that we all face so many challenges in our life, and we all need something to help us deal with it. Some people like to watch movies, some people like to read, but I think for us as Bhakti yogis, we might do something else to deal with those challenges. So if you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Well, challenges are unavoidable in life, and this material world is meant for various types of challenges. So it's not that those who are on the spiritual path do not face challenges. They do. It's only the mentality or the consciousness in which they face challenges that makes a difference. When devotees of the Lord, faithful devotees, face challenges, they do so with the understanding that there is something productive that can come out of it, something useful that can bring them and others to a higher level of thinking, of consciousness, of life. And they see these challenges as opportunities for making spiritual progress, rather than merely as adversities that need to be feared or bemoaned. One also sees challenges or difficulties, let us say, as the grace or the mercy of the Lord. And for His own divine reasons, the Lord puts us into such positions. The Lord has also placed many of His great exalted devotees in great difficulties. We see examples like Prahlad, or the Pandavas, or the Brajabasis, the residents of Vrindavan, who were great devotees of Krishna. So all of them were placed in tremendous anxieties. They had to face enormous challenges. So the reason the Lord does that is to demonstrate to the world that challenges are inevitable, they are unavoidable, and that there is a certain consciousness in which we have to face these challenges. So the reason the Lord puts these great devotees in these challenges is to teach the rest of the world how we should behave and how we should think and what our attitude should be with regard to such challenges. So one sees it first of all as an opportunity for advancement in spiritual life. One sees it as the mercy of the Lord. One also understands that this difficulty comes in our life because of one's own karma, because nothing happens by chance, and therefore one should not blame other people. While one has every right to appropriately respond to a challenge and to prevent injustice, at the same time, one can also understand that philosophically, at a certain level, one is responsible for one's own miseries and difficulties, that they are the result of what one has done previously.
Makes sense. Wow, so there's no way of escaping those challenges. Even if we take to a spiritual path, there's still going to be obstacles there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because the way this material world is designed is to give difficulty and challenges, and that's declared by Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. This world is declared to be dukkhalayam. Dukkha means misery. Alaya means an abode. So this material world is an abode of misery. So misery, suffering, difficulty, challenge, they're all unavoidable.
Is there any practical things that we can do to strengthen our mindset to accept those challenges as grace or accept them with gratitude?
Yes, well, I think the first thing to do is to not willingly raise the level of our difficulty by engaging in activities that will inevitably do so. So the scriptures prescribe certain types of activities, some that are pious in nature, some that are sinful in nature. Performing activities that transgress the norms of the scriptures, they lead to suffering. Whereas acting in accordance with the scripture leads to relief from suffering and leads us to better attitudes in life and more higher levels of consciousness. So at the very beginning, one can learn how to act and how to not act, how to think and how not to think, by referring to the tripod, that is the Guru, the Sadhu and the Shastra. The spiritual master, the previous gurus, and also the scriptures. So that's the first point. So we don't unnecessarily increase our difficulty merely because suffering is unavoidable in this world.
Right.
We also try to avoid those activities which will not unnecessarily complicate our life, right? And we see that in day-to-day life as well. We try to look for the path of least resistance in doing things. You know, if there are two roads, when you're going from one place A to place B, you'd rather choose a place that has less traffic and that can get you there sooner. So that's natural. So in our journey in the spiritual world, from the point where we are now to the point of spiritual perfection, we have to navigate a path that will minimize avoidable distress or reduce or completely avoid this kind of distress. For that we have to refer to Guru, Sadhu, Shastra. But even beyond then, there will be reasons. There will be difficulties that will come for reasons that we cannot understand at this time. Either they may be because of some karma we have performed in previous lives or perhaps earlier in this life. It may also be some plan of the Lord to teach us some good lessons. So therefore, however devoted we are, however careful we are to follow the path of Guru, Sadhu, Shastra, there will still be difficulty. So how does one cope with that, and how does one cultivate the right attitude? Number one follows the path set out by the great devotees in history. One follows in their footsteps. In Sanskrit, it's called Sadhu Vartmanu Vartanam. Sadhu means the great devotees, the sages. Vartma refers to the path. Anuvartana means to go behind, to follow. So one sees the examples of the Brajavasis, of Prahlad, of the Pandavas, and one sees that, look at their consciousness. They never forgot the Supreme Lord in the midst of their difficulties. And their difficulties were so gigantic compared to ours. And so when we face difficulty the next time, we can reflect on these great souls and think that our difficulties are very meager in comparison to theirs.
Yes.
And how much more, therefore, we should take it in a spiritual sense, in a Krishna conscious way. That's the first point. The second is we cultivate that attitude by performing spiritual practices like chanting of the holy names, personally to ourselves and congregationally, by reading the scriptures like the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita, by discussing that, hearing lectures on that, and worshipping the deity of the Lord, and in so many ways rendering devotional service to Lord Krishna. So that will automatically give us a mindset that will help us to navigate through these turbulent situations that will come as we chart our course through the ocean of material existence.
That's so beautifully put. Thank you. My second question is regarding the great epic, the Mahabharata.
Mm-hmm.
You spoke a little bit about the Pandavas and some of the great challenges they had to go through. So, in the world, we kind of know how there's the good dog and the bad dog, and whichever one we feed will grow bigger. And as I'm reading the Mahabharata, I see Yudhishthira Maharaj as kind of that example of the best person, and Duryodhana kind of like the worst person or some of the bad habits. But then there also seems to be a fine line between what's good and bad. And it can often be just the intention behind doing the very same activity of charity or cleanliness or ruling the kingdom in their case. So I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on those two and how we can be more like Yudhishthira Maharaj.
Yudhishthira and Duryodhana, they are within our heart. It's been said that there are different epochs or ages according to the scriptures, the Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapar and Kali. So 4 ages. The first age, Satya, is one in which virtue prevails and everybody is virtuous by nature and spiritually inclined and free from sinful propensities. And progressively all these good qualities diminish with the ages, and in Kali Yuga, the propensity to commit sinful activity reaches its peak, and it keeps increasing as Kali Yuga progresses. And also the good qualities keep diminishing with time. So it was said that in the age of Satya, the first age, the demon and the devotee, they lived in different planets. Say like you had Hiranyakashipu living here and then in one planet, and the demigods in another planet. And then came the next age of Treta Yuga, in which the demons and the devotees, or the virtuous persons and the demoniac persons, lived in different parts of the same planet. So you had, say, Ravana living in one country and Ram living in another. Okay, so they were on the same planet but in different parts. And as time went by, you came to the third age, which is Dwapar Yuga. And there, the demons and the devotees, they resided in the same country, in the same city, or rather in the same country, but in 2 different cities. So you had the Pandavas and the Kauravas. So Pandavas led by Yudhishthira, and the Kauravas led by Duryodhana. But in Kali Yuga, it is said the demon and the devotee both reside within our heart. So they're both here inside within us.
That's the challenge.
So that is the challenge. So the challenge is, how do we subdue the Duryodhana within us? And how do we nurture and nourish and strengthen the Yudhishthira within us? Yudhishthira and Duryodhana both are historical personalities. And then the whole Mahabharata narration, the war of the Kurukshetra, and they're all historical events that happened. So one should not see them merely as some allegorical stories or metaphorical stories. Nevertheless, these personalities in the Mahabharata, they symbolize, or they're emblematic of certain qualities and attributes. So one can learn lessons from their personality types. So Yudhishthira Maharaj represents virtue in every respect. Even when he was, his mother Kunti prayed to Dharma, the god of Dharma, demigod of Dharma. She asked for a son from him who would be just, who would be knowledgeable, and who would be virtuous. So Yudhishthira was born with such qualities. So he was virtue or dharma personified, Whereas Duryodhan was the opposite. Duryodhan had many of the bad qualities that we should try to give up. The negative things, the negative traits of personality that are not becoming of enlightened individuals, that are not conducive to overall happiness and joy in this world. When, of course, even Duryodhan had some good qualities. This was interesting, which is why I said that in this age, you see, even earlier, even bad people have some good qualities. So meaning that there's no one who's totally bad or no one who's totally good,
Right.
unless one is a pure devotee of the Lord. So even a demoniac person may have a good side to him, may have certain aspects that may be good to him. So Duryodhana also had a couple of good points. I mean, at the very end of the battle of Kurukshetra, the Mahabharata battle, when the whole battle was almost over and there was only one final battle remaining, that was a personal battle between Bhima and Duryodhana.
Yeah.
Duryodhana had taken refuge in a lake. And finally, the Pandavas found out where he was and they challenged him and they asked him to come out and fight. And Yudhishthir then said to Duryodhana, there should be a 1-to-1 fight now with the mace. And you can choose any one of us 5 to fight with. And the one who wins this particular battle will also be considered to be the victor of the entire war.
Wow.
Now, that was something, because actually the Pandavas had already won the war.
Yeah.
There was only Duryodhana remaining there.
It's really kind.
And on his side, there were 2 or 3 others. There was Kritavarma, Kripacharya, Ashwatthama. These 3 were there. But Duryodhana was the chief. Now, Duryodhana could have asked for Nakula, Sahadev, 2 of the younger brothers, or even Arjuna, or even Yudhishthir, the eldest, because they would not be able to match him in strength and in expertise in wielding the club.
Yeah.
Duryodhana was extremely skillful and powerful in fighting with the club. So he could have chosen them and he could have killed them, and then by Yudhishthir's word, he would have been the victor of the war. But he chose to fight with Bhima, who was his equal. So he had this sense of chivalry, or that a certain kind of, shall we say, code of conduct, a certain dignity. And so you see, it's very interesting that even those personalities that are very emblematic of demoniac qualities also sometimes show certain higher traits of personality.
It's really interesting.
Eventually, of course, Bhima killed Duryodhana with help from Krishna. Krishna had to guide him on how to do that. So the point is that Yudhishthir represents virtue. At the same time, we see some weaknesses in Yudhishthir, that he could not recognize the cunning nature of Shakuni and Duryodhana when they challenged him to dice. Actually, as Draupadi says in the Mahabharata, that this was cheating, because when a fight takes place, it's supposed to be amongst equals.
Yeah.
Whether it's a physical battle with swords and clubs, or whether it is a game of dice. Shakuni was well known to be a very expert dice player and who had ability to cheat. Yudhishthir Maharaj at that point in time was not so expert. So it was clearly an uneven battle. And Yudhishthir should have understood at that time. So Yudhishthir succumbed, although he had taken a vow, a long time back, that if anyone challenged him to a game of dice, he would not refuse.
Right.
So that was one of his vows. So he had to fulfill that. But in any case, somehow the other, Yudhishthir Maharaj, he had this little thing he could not distinguish. But overall, if you look at his personality, he is all virtue. Even in the forest, when Bhima, Arjuna, Draupadi were getting increasingly restless and frustrated as the years went by, and they could see clearly there was so much injustice being done, and they just wanted to get into a war with the Kauravas immediately. Yudhishthir had to persuade them to stay on and just hold on. He said, kingdoms may come and go. Even this life will come and go. We get different bodies and different lives. But it's more important to live a life in pursuance of and in accordance with dharma than it is just to acquire a kingdom or even to just exact revenge on those who have wronged us and so on. So Yudhishthir Maharaj kept his cool. He managed to tread the path of virtue and dharma under all circumstances, even the most difficult and challenging ones. This is where Yudhishthir Maharaj is a source of great inspiration to us. That despite great difficulties and challenges coming his way, he never gave up the path of dharma. Whereas Duryodhan wasn't, he did follow dharma, like in that one case of he chose his equal. So there are traces or little episodes when we see that side of Duryodhan. But by and large, he was a very envious person, a very egoistic person. And Bhishma, the grandsire of the Pandavas and the Kauravas, was speaking one time to Vidura about who would be a proper successor to King Dhritarashtra. And he listed out first the good qualities. He said how Duryodhana had certain qualities that perhaps made him better suited to be the king, which Yudhishthir didn't have. Because Yudhishthir had spent long years in the forest in exile. But Duryodhana had been there in the kingdom. So Duryodhana was more experienced than Yudhishthir. Duryodhana was more also expert in statecraft, in courtly manners. He was more expert in the military affairs and so on. Moreover, Duryodhana was also loved by the citizens. He was, largely speaking. He wasn't such an unpopular king per se, But Bhishma said, the problem is Duryodhana is power hungry. Whereas Yudhishthir Maharaj is virtuous and he tremendously cares for his people. So herein lies the difference. So even though from a material point of view, there were many attributes of Duryodhana that perhaps gave him the edge over Yudhishthir when it came to eligibility for the throne. But when it came to dharma, Yudhishthir was far superior. Even though in other material terms, he may not have been able to match Duryodhana. So the important point is that eligibility for certain positions in life, positions of leadership, are more about dharma, about virtue, than merely about material abilities. Not that a leader should not have material abilities, he must. So also Yudhishthir had material abilities. He was also a skilled fighter with the spear. And he had many other abilities as well. So you can't have a completely incompetent person becoming the leader merely because he's dharmic. You have to have a combination of competence and dharma, which Yudhishthir had. He had the best combination of the two. And his heart was soft, his heart was compassionate, and therefore he really cared for the citizens. He loved the citizens. And he upheld virtue at all times. So this is a significant point. So even in our day-to-day life, as we move on, we will face temptations, we will face challenges, and sometimes we may be faced with failures. So when we face challenges and difficulties and even failures, it's good to reflect on Yudhishthir's character. It is more important to be virtuous than to be materially successful alone. Material success is also important when we are dealing with practical realities of life. But along with all the material skills that one needs to be a good leader or a king or whatever, one must imbibe the values as enshrined in dharma. So that is the primary teaching one can glean from Yudhishthira.
It kind of seems like if you have good management skills, perhaps you could get things done, but only by following dharma will you become happy. Would you say that's correct?
Yes, absolutely. Not only will you become happy, you can make others happy. And happy in the true sense, in the dharmic sense. Happy not merely in the sense of providing sense gratification to everybody,
Right.
just material pleasures to everybody, making a good material condition available for people at large. That's not the only criterion of managerial competence. One must also enable one's dependents to elevate their own consciousness. That's also very important. And also inspire them, train them to tread the path of dharma, the path of virtue.
Wow,
right?
That's a lot to think about. Just to finish this conversation today, which I'm super grateful that we've had, is there any message that you would like to give for the next generation of leaders? What are some things or tips that you could give them?
Well, I'd say that while it is essential to move with the times, to recognize that as times go on, we have to modify, we have to adjust, and so on. Nevertheless, there are certain teachings from our ancient wisdom, like the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Gita, which are very valuable and which will always be relevant. So, for example, the example of Yudhishthira is still going to be a very relevant teaching for us. Even though we may be in 2019 now, more than 5,000 years after the Battle of Kurukshetra, but nevertheless, these teachings will still remain valid. So one can look at these examples. One can keep them in mind and gain inspiration and light from personalities like Yudhishthira Maharaj. And also where one can learn in the negative from people like Duryodhana about his egoistic nature, his materialistic way of looking at things, his power-hungry nature, right? So those are things we can avoid and look at the good traits in Yudhishthira and imbibe them. These things will always remain valid.
Wow, I think that's a lot for us to take in. Thank you so much for doing this, Marj, for sharing this message with everyone that will be watching on Facebook and YouTube. And I would like to thank our audience as well. Thank you for watching this. And if you'd like to get to know Marj, he'll be here at Bhakti Rasamrita for a few more weeks.
Yeah.
And you'll be traveling perhaps to America next?
Not to America. I'll be here in the UK and then back to India.
Back to India.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you so
Okay.
much.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the content. I hope you're inspired by it. If you were, please leave a comment and a like below, as well as subscribe. It's right here. Oh my God, would you look at that? Thank you very much.